Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us. Hey, so this is a fun podcast. Dr. Michael Lustgarten joins us to talk about aging, how to track it, and how to slow it down. So Dr. Lustgarten has a PhD in physiology and is currently a researcher at Tufts, where he's published quite a bit on the gut microbiome, serum metabolome, oxidative stress, exercise, and sarcopenia. He's an absolute animal when it comes to tracking his biomarkers, food intake, and doing these N-of-1 experiments to optimize his health and longevity. So we hope that you enjoy listening to this as much as we enjoyed talking with him. Well, Dr. Lustgarten, thanks for joining us. We're going to give you an intro before this as well, so that we can jump right in. So we've already told everybody who you are and what you do. Could you just tell us a little bit more about your lab? We were just kind of talking about that briefly. Like, what kind of studies are going on in your lab right now? What are you missing out on because of the pandemic? What's your situation there?
Sure. So it's not exactly my lab. I'm a component of a bigger lab. So at Tufts, we're a part of the Nutrition, Exercise, Physiology, and Sarcopenia Laboratory, NEPS. So the big boss of that lab is Roger Fielding, and then there are a few of us assistant professors that are essentially affiliated with the lab that have our own independent funding, but are still a component of the lab. So my primary research focus is right now is the role of the gut microbiome and serum metabolome. So basically, the bacteria, not just the bacteria, virus, fungi, whatever, all the microbes in the gut and how they associate with muscle mass. And then also the serum metabolome, which is essentially all the circulating metabolites in blood and how they correlate with muscle mass, and then looking for mechanisms that link the microbiome and their circulating metabolites with the maintenance of muscle mass and function in not just aged mice, but older adult humans. And just last on that, my last study was a human study, but again, I'm proposing human and mouse studies, translational, because there's stuff you can do in mice you can't, it's not as easy, or it's easier to do than in people.
Yeah, and that's what we want to talk to you about is aging. So from what I understand, you have a very modest goal for yourself, right? When it comes to aging.
So that's the personal approach, and it'd be great to eventually merge the two, because my 9 to 5 Clark Kent job is microbiome and aging and muscle, but it's the after hours. Well, I don't know after hours. I have to do it as a side project. It's the personal health optimization, because there really aren't grants. Actually, there aren't grants that at least labs in academia can get to do N-of-1 science. How can I optimize my biological age to live as long as possible, to break the human longevity record, which is, I'm sure you guys know is my goal. So eventually I'm going to merge the two, but for now it's one of them is paying the bills.
So what's that
and
number?
What's the number?
Well,
same question.
The lifespan, the longevity record is 122, and I just put out a video the other day, showing. I mean, I'm sure it's commonly accepted knowledge, but so about 2 out of every 10 centenarians are men. So 8 women, 2 men. So that's just getting to 100. But then at 110, it's an even lower probability. So for every 100 people who get, and even the probability of getting to 110 is super low, but of the people who get to 110, only 9 are men and 91 would be women. So from a gender perspective, the odds are heavily stacked against me. And then 2, I don't have longevity genes, at least not on the men's side of my family. The longest living man in my family is my dad, who's I think 77 right now, and his dad was dead at 67, and all of them done before that at 67. So I've said this before, and I've even made T-shirts, with the phrase, but Matt Damon's phrase in the Martian movie, where he says he's going to science the out of, I've said before, and I put it on the t-shirt, if I am going to break the record, it's going to happen because I've scienced the shit out of aging.
What's your albumin today, Michael?
5. Consistently, it's been around 5 for years. Yeah.
That's great. And can you, I know I was watching a video of you on YouTube recently, and you were talking a lot about albumin and using that AI, the aging.ai algorithm. Are you still sticking with that as your primary
No.
tool? Have you looked at anything else? Epigenetics?
And actually, so there are two thoughts along that thought process. So aging.ai was probably the best available biological age calculator. And I say best in quotes because the epigenetic stuff wasn't commercially available, or if it was $300 a test. And then it was Horvath's initial clock, which didn't see any associations with smoking in accelerating epigenetic age acceleration, which to me is a huge red flag. So nonetheless, I don't want to knock them. I've heard Joe Rogan say he's just a stupid monkey, and all these other brilliant people are doing great work. So the Horvath group, including Morgan Levine, I'm eternally grateful to them for their service to science, because I'm using their tools to try to optimize my own stuff. So aging.ai, I had data, a lot of data, because it's basically the Chem screen and stuff you get when you go to a yearly physical. So I have 20 plus blood tests so I was using that almost exclusively. And then Morgan published her work in 2018. So later in the summer, I first started going after CRP, because that's basically the main difference between the aging.ai and Morgan's. By the way, it's a great podcast you guys did where I listened to the whole thing. But so yeah, in 2018, then I started going after the CRP and her phenotypic age calculator. And the reason I'm more heavily focused on that now is because the correlation for aging.ai's 19 or even up to, I think they're 40 analyte panel with chronological age was at best 0.8. So a perfect correlation is 1 or -1. So the closer you can get to 1, you've got perfectly linear correlation. So 0.8 is good. It's better than 0.5. But Morgan Levine's phenotypic age calculator, in 2 different studies, they found its correlation was 0.94 and then 0.96. And then in comparing that to the initial Horvath clock, which was done mostly on cells, their correlation was 0.97. And then actually some of the Horvath's group, their group's epigenetic clocks, and in concert with Morgan's work, DNA Grim age, and I think there's another one that the name escapes me off the top of my head, but that are basically also 0.97. So long story short is Morgan's clinical chemistry variables, the 9 analytes, have essentially the same correlation with biological age as the epigenetic clock stuff. So that's, it's an $80 test essentially with the CBC and CRP, in comparison again with the Horvath clock, which is commercially available and doesn't include smoking. And then the DNA Grim age isn't commercially available. So if you're doing epigenetic stuff, testing it on your own, I'd argue using an outdated metric or an outdated quantifying tool.
So Michael, you two science nerds, you and Mike, jumped straight in talking about albumin and correlation factors and all that. So I want to bring us back just a second. So you've got this goal to break the longevity record.
Yep.
Obviously, I'm a few years behind you, so I'm going to see where you land, and I'm going to try to beat it with a gender reassignment surgery and whatever else I need to do.
I'm not doing that. No disrespect to anyone who does that, but I'm not doing that. There's some lengths I won't go.
So tell me how you're shooting for that goal exactly. And what I mean by that is, let's do big picture and then let's zoom in on the details. So tell me what you think is important to measure, because what I like about your work is you take a very quantitative approach, an N of 1 quantitative approach. So to get to your goal, tell me how you think about that in general, and then we'll dig into the specifics and why.
Right. So to be totally honest, whether I can even get to 122 is unknown, right? Because let's say my genetic maximum is 104 or whatever it may be. So all I can do is minimize risk, but optimally. So that's all I can do. And then I can squeeze all of the juice out of my orange and that'll fully optimize it. Now, what I'm doing is, so inherent in the process of aging or disease is a biological process. It isn't just something that happens, you wake up one day and physically and biologically 75. It's been, it's something that goes on for decades or longer, since you stop growing. So my perspective is, well, I should say before I go into that real quick, the old school perspective used to be eat real food and exercise, the Jack LaLanne story, which I have great respect for Jack LaLanne, and they got him to, 95 years old, but I guess his brother wasn't, as fitness motivated as him and lived, essentially 97, 96, something like that, So what's the higher level beyond just eating real food and exercise? So in terms of this idea that aging and disease is a biological process, if you track metrics of established metrics for a long period of time, you can, in theory, see things at the onset of when they go wrong or in the wrong direction, and then intervene and potentially slow the process. Now, maybe I won't optimally slow it immediately. Maybe it'll take me a year or a few measurements, however it may take to finally get to figure it out. But I'd argue that the active tracking, you'll get better at it. And maybe you won't get to the best you can, but you'll make progress rather than doing nothing. So I'm quantifying my food intake every day. I weigh all my food. And yes, socially that sucks, but people who know me, it shouldn't be a problem because that's, it's who I am. It's what I do. And then I log all of that data into free online software. So I'm basically, actually I have 5 years of food intake data, but I only started writing it down in terms of, putting it into an Excel file about 2 years ago. In hindsight, that was, I wish I'd, done it more often. I mean, now to go back and put in 1,000 days of food data, one by one, it's a lot of time.
What
site are you using?
Just Chronometer.
I think
they're all the same.
Can you export it? I think you can actually export that data.
So you have to pay for it, and I'm a cheap bastard when it comes to that stuff. So
Science, but not at a cost.
Yeah, no, always at a cost. But for whatever reason, I don't know. There's also something to logging it one by one, taking the 5 minutes to put it in, because then I get to actually think about my numbers too. It's weird. I don't know.
So one thing that popped in my mind when I was watching one of your videos, Michael, was that you put all this work into tracking your daily intake, but how is that affecting your age? What are you doing with that tracking? Like, are you making different choices based on that? Walk us through that process in your mind.
Yeah. So before I go through that, just to finish that last thought about the how I'm going to get to that longevity goal. So I've got everything logged by diet, and then I blood test. Actually, this year I may actually go beyond 6 blood tests a year. So say I blood test on January 1st and then March 1st. So that 60-day period, I have dietary data. So for that March 1st blood test, I now have 60 days of diet, an average dietary intake that corresponds to the March 1st blood test. Now, if you have one dietary period and one blood test, day, you can't look at correlations. I mean, there's just no statistical power. Now, if you've done that 3 times, it's getting better, but you need a lot of dietary data to potentially correlate with your blood test stuff. So by tracking it for so long, now I have, over the last 5 years, around 25 dietary periods that correlate with 25 blood test data. So now, to go to your question, I can look for correlations and build rudimentary multivariate models for predicting each individual analyte. So for example, albumin, right? So first I'll just in a simple regression plot, I'll look for albumin's regression against my calorie intake, against my total protein intake, against sat fat, omega-3, and then all the vitamins and minerals. And then once I'm through with that, then I'll go even further and just correlate it with my individual food intake, or the sum of all my fruit, or the sum of all my vegetables, the sum of all my animal products and nuts and seeds. And then I'll look for the strongest correlations. And in the case of albumin, it may be in the video that I have online, but if not, it's definitely on my blog. But there's definitely been improvement, because albumin, as you know, decreases during aging. And if based on my age, where my albumin level should be is on that downward sloping thing. And I've actually gone in reverse. I've actually gotten it to go from somewhere around 4.7 or so before tracking to around 4.950 consistently tracking. So in terms of some metrics, I'd argue they are very malleable through diet. And that actually gets to the point of personalized nutrition. I can kind of, beyond what the RDA says and beyond what the epidemiological studies say, just in looking at my own data and the correlations, if I see that 55 milligrams of beta carotene correlates with an albumin of 5, well, if that's true, if I shoot a little lower, my albumin should go down. And if I shoot a little higher, my albumin should go maybe up. So I can kind of even find my own personal sweet spots for each of these variables. Now, it's not a perfect system, and I'm still working out details even with 25 blood tests. But I'd argue with more data, it'll become more clear.
So you're tracking with Chronometer, and anybody can do that. That's a free app.
Yep.
So that's a good place to start. You are obviously pretty intense with this, and to get the amount of, if you get to get real correlations that there may be some causation there, you need big numbers. It's going to be hard for people to get there. Could you tell me first off what you've seen as the most powerful correlations that you've kind of confirmed with repeat testing? And then I want to talk about what other people could potentially do, some of the easier interventions that aren't as intense as what you're doing. But what are you seeing as the biggest things, or maybe unexpected things that this makes a difference?
Yeah, so I hate to keep harping on it, but albumin is probably the easiest from my perspective to optimize. And that may not seem like much, but I argued in one of my latest videos that albumin is probably the most underrated biomarker that exists. Most people go straight to glucose, lipid profile, cholesterol, but in 3 different biological age calculators, albumin is one of the ones that ends up being, selected in an unbiased way, meaning the researchers didn't start off saying we're going to include albumin in our model. What does the data say in terms of the strongest predictors of biological age? So, yeah, I've my daily, for example, just in terms of albumin, as I mentioned, I shoot for around 55 milligrams of beta carotene a day. And that's completely through diet. So I eat probably, anywhere, up to a pound or more of carrots a day. If it's not carrots, it's orange sweet potatoes, enough to get 55 milligrams of beta carotene. But then interestingly, I've been playing around with my diet because lately I've seen increases for my glucose levels and creatinine, which are going in the wrong direction. They both go up with age. And it's not like I'm unfit, so glucose levels go up. We think of, I'm not pre-diabetic, not even close, but you would think that for glucose levels to go up during aging, if you're, unfit, out of shape, you'll be more likely to have higher glucose levels. But I see in my data, actually my last 2 measurements, values of 99, which is insane to me. So it's playing with the different data, I've actually been using my glucometer every morning now to see more directly instead of 1 blood test every few weeks. But in terms of stuff that regular people can do, I hate to sound like an elitist, but I don't think this is going to apply to the masses. I think this is going to apply to a highly motivated, small subset of the population that eventually will grow. 300, 400 years ago, Newton, everybody wasn't doing what Newton was doing, with gravity. And now we're all like, yeah, whatever, gravity, it's common knowledge, right? So eventually all this stuff will be common knowledge, but until then.
So explain albumin to us, someone that doesn't know anything about it. What level should you shoot for? What do different numbers mean?
So albumin is a protein produced by the liver, and just as a simple explanation, its levels decrease in the presence of inflammation. Inflammation goes up with age, so correspondingly, albumin levels go down with age. So they peak in, actually the published literature, they peak at around 4.7, I think, and 4.5 in men and women, respectively. And then values higher than 4.4 and 4.5 in women and men are associated with lowest risk of death from all causes in a variety of big studies. So higher is better. Values around 3.2, 3.4 compared to 5 grams per liter are found in centenarians. So you don't want to have low levels of albumin.
And you mentioned beta carotene having a big effect on that. So 2 questions about beta carotene. 1, do you think it's important you get it from food instead of supplementing? And number 2, what color is your poop?
Normal color. I prefer food over supplements. That's not to say I don't supplement. I take vitamin D in the winter here, Boston. So, but in the summer I'm out as much as there's sun out there. I'm out there for about an hour a day getting, my skin vitamin D production. And then I also supplement with a vitamin, methylfolate, methyl B12, and a B6 stack, because my homocysteine, for whatever reason, seems to want to go about twice as high than it should with just doing nothing. So, and that's trying lots of stuff to change it through diet. So my perspective is always food over supplements, and the reason that I go to that is evolutionarily. So we evolved to eat real food. You know, the idea of super physiological doses of individual nutrients is a relatively new phenomenon that we may or may not be evolutionarily adapted to. So I don't know what the consequence of taking very high levels of methyl, B12 or methylfolate. I don't know what but on another level, I also don't have a choice, because if my homocysteine levels go unchecked as too high for a long period of time, it may increase my risk of stroke and cerebrovascular disease. So I almost, just based on that, I almost always am shooting for whole food as a primary strategy. Whole food is yeah.
Oh, sorry. So how often are you testing these markers, these biomarkers? As you said, every few weeks?
No. So far this year, four times, 4 blood tests. I'm planning on measuring either the end of this month or early in September before school starts for my daughter. So then it'll make it harder to get to the lab. But yeah, I'd say every couple of months is ideal for that. And I've heard people say, oh, why don't you just do once every 6 months or once every year? But I'm finding that there are seasonal variation, for me at least, in biomarkers. For example, whether or not I get a flu shot and whether or not it was coronavirus, I still don't know, even though the antibody test came up as negative. And there is actually some data that the antibodies may fade with time. So you don't know if you had it 3 months after. But in February, I got hit with some kind of a respiratory infection. And let's say I measured my biomarkers in January, which is a good month for me. And I know because, heart rate, cardiovascular metrics, I won't go into that yet. I don't know if we'll get into it. But so January, probably I have really good blood test data. February, I know that it was slightly suboptimal because I had measured right around the time I had that respiratory infection. So if I'm measuring in months when I know that something's going to hit me, or avoiding those months, I'm going to have a distorted view of the whole picture of my biological age or health. For example, also, I get crushed with seasonal allergies. As soon as this grass starts growing, I'm sneezing and puffy eyes. Like I have a video, Lifespan.io's conference last year that I gave early in July. And you can see my eyes are completely puffy. I mean, it was just murder for me. So
yeah, so your CRP might be elevated from that.
Might. Definitely. I see, my CRP in non-February or summer months is around 0.3, which is really good based on the literature. And then, my last measurement was 1 in late July, and in June, it was a couple of years ago, and essentially double. I get about a 2 to 3-fold increase in CRP, which, is not going to be good for my biological age. So on one hand, there's skip those months. Don't measure your stuff during those months. But no, I look at it the other way. Those are my worst months. So if I can find a way to reduce my symptoms, to reduce my CRP and other metrics that go wrong in those worst months, potentially I'm going to further slow my aging process because I'm improving where I can rather than the other months where I don't see changes in CRP. So I'd argue that at least 6 times a year for blood testing is probably optimal.
And I wonder if more frequent wouldn't be better. I mean, you would theoretically get tighter correlation coefficients with some of these variables that might be related to the biomarkers that you're testing. So, I mean, I guess, have you considered getting like an at-home CBC and CRP machine and just doing this on like the daily?
I have, but it's super expensive. I think I'm thinking 50 to 200,000 off the top of my head. And, if I'm going to go to that road, that's when it's time to start a company and sending out, people sending me blood and, getting utility out of that. And then I wouldn't do that because there are already companies that are doing that. But that may be something that I'm interested in doing because, but not right now, but definitely at some point down the line. I mean, the idea of, I talked to Daniel Maggs and his company Visu, who's essentially working in part on a smart toilet, looking at urine and then, collecting as much relevant biological information from that to optimize your health. But I love the idea of a smart toilet, so, it's the same idea, whether it's a smart toilet or, having the CBC machine in my house and measuring this stuff every day. But there's a limitation on that, right? So if I go left arm, right arm to pull blood out of my veins on two consecutive days, I'm probably going to have to give the left arm a break for a couple of days because I don't know how good it is to keep jabbing a vein, needle in that same vein, right? So there's going to be a limitation on how many veins you can jab and your pain threshold. So, yeah.
So I think it's a very important caveat that we mentioned where everything we're talking about is N of one. We're talking about your experience, but it's valuable because you're a human being. Most of our audience are human beings. So you've already mentioned albumin. That's very
Yeah.
important. What are your, before we move on to like tracking and other HRV or things like that, maybe, what are, we say, your top 5 biomarkers you think most correlate with aging that everyone should be following if they can?
Right. So for me, it isn't just, all right, top 5. I go straight to the biological age calculators, especially Morgan Levine's, right? So definitely albumin, glucose, creatinine. Those are probably the top 3, but that's not to diminish other biomarkers. And the reason I say that is because, so albumin for it's being correlated with so many or involved in so many biological age calculators. Glucose, obviously insulin resistance is a big part of aging. You want to minimize that, but most people sleep on kidney function too. Creatinine is a marker of kidney function. And if your kidney function is bad, you're going to have higher levels of blood urea nitrogen. Blood urea nitrogen actually has been shown to weaken gut barrier function. And if you've got worse gut barrier function, which is known to decrease during aging, you're going to have elevated levels of systemic inflammation. So most people sleep on the idea of worse kidney function. No, so albumin, glucose, creatinine, and then definitely CRP. Inflammation is huge. You got to measure at least CRP, IL-6. And then, your white blood cells, neutrophils and lymphocytes, the distribution, not just the total number, but the neutrophils and lymphocytes, how many that there are is also important because, as people are, just waking up to now with lymphocytes in coronavirus, people start off with a relatively decent amount of lymphocytes. And then when they're infected, severe infection, they drop to about half, about 800 cells per microliter. And, if you don't have enough white blood cells to fight off microbes that are infecting you, you're gonna die. There's just no other way around it. So most people don't even think about that either. But I don't want to, five biomarkers, is important. But for me, it isn't just to say, all right, here's a biological age calculator, plug your data in and study it over time. Like that doesn't tell you anything about really understanding the system. So I spent a lot of time in studying each of these biomarkers, whether it's, the 9 that are on Morgan Levine's or the 19 up to 40 that are on aging.ai. I wanted to know how do they change with age and what's associated with disease risk. So besides just, looking at the reference range, am I too high or too low? I want to actually know where should my data be. So I'd say it's essential beyond just picking 5 to actually have that understanding. And that's one of the reasons I've been, making a lot of videos lately, or just, started to make a lot of videos lately, because I think that's also an underappreciated, role in terms of studying aging. It's not just plug and play your numbers into a system. You really need to understand the process in order to make real change.
And where could people go to plug their own numbers into the calculators you're referring to?
There is I don't have the link obviously off the top of my head, but someone so graciously made a website that uses Morgan Levine's data to just put the numbers in. I can send you guys the link later. That's an easy thing.
Perfect. Yeah, we can post that for sure.
Yep.
So getting your blood tested every month, every 2 months, that's great. But what about daily? Are you using any feedback like an Oura ring, Whoop, any other things you're doing to track your heart rate? Yeah, there you go. So tell us what you're doing with the tracking daily.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw it, but yeah, I think Whoop and Oura are probably the 2 dominant players in this field. Because I don't think, well, I don't know, maybe Apple Watch too. But so I've been wearing Whoop for about 2 years. And the main reason for that is, so exercise is well known to increase average lifespan, but there are no bodybuilders and there are no marathon runners that are 115. I mean, granted, the people who get to 115 or 122, and again, no disrespect, but they look like shit and they're basically walking skeletons. So, but they're not getting there based on fitness, which is
I'm sure they wouldn't take I'm sure they wouldn't take that as disrespect. Yeah.
All right. Well, and it's it happens to all of us. Me in my 40s versus me in my 20s, relatively shit. So, but so there's something about exercise that's obviously great for average lifespan, but that also at the same time is limiting in terms of getting to the maximum. I mean, it's counterintuitive to think that when you work on your physical fitness, and in part it's mental too, right? I mean, you've got to have some level of mental fitness in order to want to be physically fit. But the act of being physically fit, to me, you should be able to live way past the maximum lifespan, but that's not what the data shows at all. So 2 years ago, I I was tired of feeling tired and burned out. And I said, all right, I'm going to get more serious. And people were talking about HRV, and I didn't know what it was for a long time. Whoop does HRV, and it does sleep stages, which I was having issues with. I was having bad problems with my sleep. I was doing one meal a day and fasting all day until 6 o'clock at night, and then eating 2,000 to 3,000 calories of food all at night. And I eat a ton of vegetables. So if I'm eating, 4 pounds of food, I'm awake every hour or two at night to pee, and killed my sleep. So once I started tracking, all of that improved. I mean, I completely changed when I exercised, when I ate. My resting heart rate is down about 5 beats per minute over 2 years. My heart rate variability is up, going in directions that are opposite of aging. Now, I'm not going to always make those, improvements. I'm eventually going to hit a plateau, but I'd rather hit a plateau of super optimized cardiovascular metrics than where I was. So, and then the challenge is going to be, once you get to your lowest resting heart rate for a given amount of exercise, because maybe I can increase my exercise every day, or train harder, or whatever it is, right? Eventually, there's going to be that basal level, or I can't put in more time. It's just too much, and that's going to be my basal levels. Now, then the question is, how slowly have I slowed aging, right? Is my resting heart rate getting worse at 1 beat every 10 years, 1 beat every 15 years, or is it just not changing over the next 20 years? So first is optimizing it, and then let's see how slow the aging rate is. And that also goes into the biological age calculation, because although my phenotypic age is right now around 13 years younger than my chronological, I'm confident I can get that lower. In theory, you can get to about 20 years lower than your chronological age. So I'm confident I can get pretty close to that. And then the question is, just like the fitness metrics, how much have I slowed the rate of aging? Now, does my biological age of 30-something increase at half a year for every 2 years, half a year for every year? So maximally getting the lowest number, and then how slowed have you made the process?
Yeah, I think that daily feedback with the Whoop and the Oura Ring is really important. We're a big fan of blood markers and testing all the things you mentioned, but having a 2-month period there, that feedback loop, it's hard to make really meaningful changes, but seeing how specific things like food intake at different times affects your sleep is really helpful, just in our experience as well. Any other feedback, like quick feedback loops you're using other than Whoop, or is that really your go-to?
Yeah, Whoop is what else should I have in there? I mean, what would you suggest that I should have in there that I don't have in there?
I do a CGM. I consider a continuous glucose monitor. I think that another is a rapid feedback that's been really beneficial, at least for me and a lot of my patients.
Yeah, I'm not adverse to that idea at all. And considering that I'm using my glucometer every morning for the past 2 weeks, that may be sooner rather than later. But part of it too is, I hate to sound I'm going to sound anti-science now, right? Like, there are foods that I like to eat, and I'm already picking them out. Like, for example, I like raw mushrooms, right? And I would eat, they're a great source of fiber, great source of protein. I mean, granted, it's not a great source compared to meat, but if I'm eating 2 pounds of raw mushrooms, I'm going to get a decent dose of anyway, my liver enzymes, for whatever reason, maybe it's too much niacin because mushrooms are loaded with niacin. My liver enzymes go up, probably about 10 units higher than they should. So if I'm going to get to the level of CGM and I see a glucose spike, I don't know, God damn it, I'm like picking out all the foods that I like. And I'm not talking about pizza and ice cream and junk.
It's hard to sound anti-science when you've been using a chronometer for like 5 years, by the way.
Yeah.
But I think that the other thing is you've got me interested in this idea of at-home CRP testing, because one thing that I struggle with a lot with our patients is that CRP changes so quickly, right? So I'll see people who they had a big exercise the other day and their CRP is up for 24, 48 hours, or, they were sick a week ago, like you were mentioning, and their CRP has been elevated. So it's hard to take that, that even monthly testing and really make definitive changes with it. I mean, obviously we still do because it's the best we got, but man, getting like daily CRP, like a continuous CRP monitor, that would be pretty amazing.
not just daily, but, is that diurnal variation, right?
Right. Yeah.
Or does it stay stable during time? But just along those lines, I try to be as scientific with the blood draws as possible. So, I don't exercise at all. Well, I don't weight lift the day before my blood test. And then I fast for 17 hours. So I try to make the exact amount of time that I fasted and the definite no exercise on the day before. So it's 48 hours, around 48 hours in between exercise sessions that I blood test. So I try to standardize as many of the variables. Ideally I'd have the same diet the day before, the blood test, right? So you fast overnight. So if I had the same exact diet on the day before my blood draw for 25 measurements, that would also reduce the variability, whatever variability there would be in CRP and the chem panel. But yeah, it's a great point in terms of CRP and potentially other variables being variable, right?
Right.
Well, Michael, I think if people want to really, two things real quick. If people really want to geek out with you, because I feel like we could for hours talk about all these different biomarkers and what you can do and what you're doing, but that's already out there. You've got all these great videos and great data. Where can people go first off if they really want to dive in and learn more from you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm everywhere on social media, or not everywhere, but growing, I guess. YouTube channel, Michael Lustgarten, PhD. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. I've got a blog. Just type in my name, Michael Lustgarten. Just reach out.
And then to give you a much more difficult question to kind of end, if someone is like, this guy is brilliant, but I don't have hours to go. If you really took everything you've learned with yourself and just the studies you're doing, everything else, and just you had to compress that into 1 to 2 minutes, kind of 60 seconds for someone, just a take-home message, not a total nerd like us, what would you say are the most important things for people to maximize their health span?
Sure. I'd say tracking. Track whether it's your diet, whether it's your fitness metrics. Just start with something. Even if it's just your cardiovascular health. If you track one metric, it's going to be better than tracking none. Now, I'd argue tracking as many as you can is going to be optimal, but it starts with one or a few metrics. So, I don't know. I think this is nerd business. I don't know that the average person would care, right? So, put your numbers in the biological age calculator, and if you want to know more about how the data should look or what changes with age and disease risk, then just look up some of my blogs or videos, and that'll be a quick and easy way to get at the data. I try to get the data out there and as concise, even though I'm talking my head off over here. Right? I try to get it out as concisely as possible, as quickly as possible, with as little data, representative data as possible. Right? So if you go to an albumin post of mine, I don't like reading 4 pages of text on albumin. For me, it's boring. So if it's boring for me, how's it going to be for someone who cares even less, right? So I try to get the representative data for all of the data, put that into as concise a format as possible. So I have 2-minute videos up to 20-minute videos, just trying to be as concise as possible.
And then when you say track it, you think the aging calculator is the best thing, or it sounds like you like the Whoop as well? What would be the easiest place for people to start tracking?
Yeah, so every year that you go to your physical, whatever those results are, get them, right? For the people that do go to a once-a-year physical with their doctor, you're going to have blood tests. So it can be as simple as, that's what I did for probably about 10 years. I just, got my yearly blood tests and I recorded them into an Excel file and try to change stuff in my diet. I don't like where this is. And from there it grew. I wanted to get more into it. So just track, start, find something you're interested in. If you want to be, improve it and track. Or if you're not, just diet and exercise. And, if that's what works for you, do it. But if you want to go to a higher level, and eventually someone will, come up with a machine learning approach to integrate all of this data. And I said this before, I'm using the rudimentary tools to statistically analyze it and basically one biomarker at a time. But someone's going to come along, whether it's me or somebody else, is going to, come up with a more advanced statistical approach to integrate all of the data and, say, this is what I should eat today. This is how much and at what intensity I should exercise for today, and eventually we'll truly have this personalized medicine. So, if you're interested in that, study more on that and beat me to the punch. Get there before me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you've got great content. I really just wanted to dig into it a little bit, your general approach, and introduce you to our audience as well. But we'd love to have you back on and dig into some very specific things as well, if that's okay with you.
Sounds good, guys.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, and we can't wait to talk to you again soon, Michael.
All right,
Thanks, Michael.
care, guys. Peace out. See ya.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you found it helpful, give us a 5-star rating and write a review on iTunes. It really helps the podcast, and we greatly appreciate it. If you want to be a client or you want to work with us, go to wildhealth.com. Thanks again.